Sheikh Khalid Al Mansoor thought he had found the perfect bride in Maria De Vera, but when he discovered her 3 secret husbands, their $2 million wedding turned into a deadly nightmare. The Al-Khazar Palace Hotel glittered like a jewel against the Dubai skyline that night. Every corner of the grand ballroom was wrapped in gold silk, with roses imported from France and chandeliers so bright they bathed the marble floors in liquid light. It was the wedding of the year, the kind that would fill society pages for weeks. Guests from royal families, international business elites, and foreign dignitaries filled the hall, whispering about the extravagance of Sheikh Khalid Al Mansoor's celebration. At 48, the Sheikh was one of Dubai's wealthiest men, his fortune built on oil, real estate, and quiet power. But tonight, it wasn't his wealth being admired, it was his bride. Maria De Vera, a 32-year-old Filipina woman, walked down the aisle with quiet grace, her pearl-studded gown shimmering like morning dew. Every camera turned toward her as she took slow steps across the gold-carpeted path, her dark hair crowned with diamonds, her smile serene but unreadable. She looked like a vision of perfection, the kind of beauty that silences entire rooms. Yet beneath her calm exterior, her heart beat fast. She had dreamed of this life, of luxury, of belonging among the powerful, but she also knew she was stepping into a world that would demand more than she could give. As vows were exchanged, guests wiped tears from their eyes, touched by the union of 2 worlds, wealth and humble beginnings. The Sheikh held her hand tightly, his expression filled with affection and pride. Fireworks exploded outside the palace walls, painting the night sky in gold and crimson. Everyone saw a fairy tale unfolding, but Maria saw something else, a stage built on secrets, and a future glittering with danger she could already feel closing in. Maria's new life began beneath the golden arches of the Sheikh's palace, surrounded by fountains, servants, and the quiet hum of wealth. From the outside, she looked like the luckiest woman in the world, a Filipina who had married into Dubai's royal elite. She wore silk gowns, dined under chandeliers, and woke to the sound of waves breaking on the private shore. Yet even as she smiled for photographs and waved to guests, an unease lingered deep inside her. Every luxury she touched reminded her how fragile her secret was. She knew that one discovery could destroy everything she had built. Long before she met Sheikh Khalid, Maria's life had been defined by survival. Growing up in a crowded Manila neighborhood, she learned early that charm and appearance could open doors that money could not. Her first marriage, at 20, was to a fisherman who adored her but offered nothing beyond struggle. When he disappeared during a storm, Maria remarried a businessman, convinced she deserved a better life. But when that relationship soured, she fled again, starting fresh under a new name. By 30, she had lived 3 lives and married 3 men, each believing she was theirs alone. Now, in the palace halls of Dubai, she tried to bury those past identities. But they haunted her in quiet moments, in the flicker of candlelight, in the faces of the servants who watched her curiously, and in her own reflection. The Sheikh's trust was pure and unwavering, and that frightened her more than his power. She had lied before, but never to someone who could crush her with a single command. Beneath her diamond necklace and practiced grace, Maria carried the weight of 3 forgotten vows, and a secret that could turn her fairy tale into a nightmare. Sheikh Khalid's affection knew no limits. In the weeks following the wedding, he surrounded Maria with luxuries that most could only dream of. A white Rolls-Royce Phantom awaited her at the palace gate each morning. A closet lined with designer gowns arrived from Paris, each one personally chosen for her. He even commissioned a private beachfront villa on Palm Jumeirah, its walls carved with her initials and its windows facing the Arabian Sea. Maria smiled through every grand gesture, playing the part of the grateful bride. But deep inside, she could feel the walls closing in. Every gift made her more visible. Every appearance in the public eye brought her closer to discovery. The palace staff adored her at first, calling her Madame Maria and praising her kindness. But soon, they began to whisper. They noticed the late-night phone calls, the secret letters that arrived in plain brown envelopes, and her growing habit of locking herself in her study for hours. Once, a maid claimed to have overheard her crying softly in a language no one understood. Another swore Maria had burned photographs in the courtyard furnace before dawn. The rumors spread quietly through the servants' quarters, reaching the Sheikh's assistant, Ahmed, who watched everything with quiet suspicion. Khalid, however, saw none of it. To him, Maria was perfection, delicate, loyal, and devoted. He spoke of starting a family, of building a future that would outshine every love story in Dubai. Maria would smile and nod, her hands trembling under the dinner table. Every time he looked at her with those proud, trusting eyes, guilt crawled higher up her chest. She had everything she had ever wanted, yet she could feel the past approaching, like a storm forming far beyond the calm desert horizon. One warm evening, as the palace glowed under amber lights, Sheikh Khalid prepared for a charity dinner. He adjusted his cufflinks, admiring how life had fallen perfectly into place. Maria, radiant in a silver gown, joined him with her usual calm smile. But that night, fate had something else planned. As he checked his phone before leaving, a message appeared from an unknown number. The words were short, but enough to freeze his breath. Asterisk, your wife belongs to 3 men before you. Asterisk attached was a grainy photograph. Maria standing beside another man in front of a church altar, both wearing wedding rings. At first, Khalid dismissed it as nonsense. In his world, envy was common, and anonymous threats were part of wealth. Still, something in the image unsettled him. The way Maria's hand rested on the man's arm looked too natural, too familiar. He turned off the phone and slipped it into his pocket, refusing to let the suspicion ruin the night. Yet the thought followed him like a shadow. At dinner, surrounded by laughter and music, Khalid found his eyes wandering toward Maria again and again. She looked flawless, speaking softly to guests, smiling at the right moments, unaware that the man beside her was no longer the same. Every word she spoke now sounded like a performance. When they returned home, Khalid couldn't sleep. The message replayed endlessly in his mind. By dawn, he was pacing his study, staring at the photograph again. He enlarged it, noticed the ring on her finger, the church's foreign markings. Something inside him shifted, not anger, but quiet disbelief. For the first time since their marriage, he looked at Maria not as his wife, but as a mystery that demanded to be solved. Days passed, but the message refused to leave Sheikh Khalid's mind. He tried to ignore it, tried to believe that envy had created lies, yet every time Maria smiled, doubt crept deeper into his thoughts. Late one night, unable to bear the uncertainty, he entered the walk-in closet Maria used as her private dressing room. Her perfume still lingered in the air, a sweet, heavy scent that seemed to mock him. He began searching carefully through her things, lifting silk scarves, opening boxes, and checking drawers. It wasn't anger that guided him, but a quiet desperation to know the truth. Behind a row of evening gowns, he found a small leather suitcase, its handle worn and its zipper stiff. Inside lay folded clothes, old passports, and an envelope sealed with tape. When he opened it, he froze. Inside were 3 marriage certificates, each stamped and signed in different provinces of the Philippines. The names on them varied slightly: Marissa de la Cruz, Marianne Rivera, Myra Velasco, but the photograph was the same face he now saw every morning. His heart sank. Each certificate listed a different husband. His hands trembled as he placed the papers on the table, reading each line again and again, unable to believe what he was seeing. The realization struck him like a storm. The woman he had proudly called his wife, the one he had placed above all others, was living a lie deeper than he could have imagined. He sat down slowly, his breath shallow, his mind spinning. Anger tried to rise, but it was buried beneath shock. In that moment, he didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the thought that everyone might have been right about her. The Sheikh's perfect love story had just begun to unravel, one secret page at a time. By morning, the palace no longer felt like home. Sheikh Khalid moved through its marble halls as if he were walking through the ruins of his own pride. Maria greeted him at breakfast with her usual warmth, unaware that the papers she had hidden were now locked in his study safe. Her voice sounded distant to him, her laughter hollow. Every glance she gave seemed rehearsed, every gentle gesture and act carefully performed. He said nothing, but inside, his trust had died quietly during the night. That same day, Khalid contacted a private investigator in Manila, a man known for uncovering buried truths. He sent copies of the documents and photographs and asked for a full background check on every name listed. Within a week, The investigator called back with the confirmation Khalid both feared and expected. Maria had indeed been married 3 times in the past decade. One husband was a fisherman from Batangas who reported her missing after she vanished with his savings. Another was a businessman in Cebu who believed she had died in an accident abroad. The third, a retired police officer, had spent years searching for her before finally giving up. Each man, the investigator said, still carried deep scars from her disappearance. Khalid listened in silence as the truth unfolded, feeling as if his entire life had become a performance staged by someone else. He didn't lash out, didn't confront her, didn't break anything. Instead, he began to plan. His calmness frightened even his assistant, Ahmed, who sensed something cold behind his composed face. The sheikh continued to treat Maria with the same tenderness as before, even ordering gifts and hosting dinners. But behind his soft eyes, a quiet fury was forming, a patient storm waiting for the right moment to strike. The honeymoon was meant to be a celebration of love, but for Sheikh Khalid, it became a stage for observation. He took Maria to a private island in the Maldives, a paradise where turquoise waters met white sand and silence ruled the air. The world saw it as the perfect escape, a wealthy man honoring his new bride with unmatched luxury. The villa stood alone, surrounded by palm trees and guarded by discreet security. Maria believed she was finally safe from suspicion, her secret buried beneath waves and distance. She didn't notice that every step she took was being watched. Khalid had grown calm, too calm. He smiled, spoke gently, and made no mention of the documents he had found. He acted as though the message, the doubts, and the investigation had never existed. But his silence carried weight. He had already reached out to one of Maria's former husbands through the investigator, offering him an all-expenses-paid trip to Dubai under the pretense of a legal inquiry. His plan was simple, to bring her past to her doorstep. On the island, Maria tried to enjoy her new reality. She posed for photographs by the infinity pool, laughed as the sea breeze played with her hair, and thanked Khalid for every extravagant surprise. Yet something about his quietness unsettled her. He no longer touched her the same way. His eyes no longer lingered with warmth. They studied her, measured her, as though she were a puzzle he was close to solving. At night, when Khalid stood by the balcony overlooking the ocean, Maria watched him from the bed, feeling a chill she couldn't explain. The paradise around them sparkled under moonlight, but beneath its beauty, danger was beginning to breathe. Within 2 weeks of returning from the Maldives, Dubai's skyline gleamed under the same golden sun, but something dark had begun to move behind the palace walls. Sheikh Khalid's quiet plan was unfolding precisely as he intended. Through his investigator, he had located all 3 of Maria's former husbands and offered each of them a trip to Dubai. The invitations were disguised as official requests to verify old immigration paperwork. Each man, unaware of the others, accepted. They arrived separately, one from Batangas, one from Cebu, and one from Davao, all believing they were part of a routine government matter. The Sheikh's team arranged private accommodations for them under false identities, monitoring their movements from the moment they landed. His assistant, Ahmed, kept detailed reports, flight logs, hotel check-ins, even the calls they made home. Khalid followed everything closely but maintained his mask of calm around Maria. He continued to treat her like a cherished wife, taking her to charity events and dinners, ensuring no one suspected the storm building behind his composed exterior. Maria remained blissfully unaware. She spent her days shopping with friends, visiting spas, and planning a lavish birthday celebration that Khalid had promised her. Yet, small details began to disturb her. She thought she saw a familiar face at the airport one afternoon, a man she once knew, watching her quietly before vanishing into the crowd. Another time, she received a phone call with heavy breathing and silence on the other end. Her hands shook as she ended it. She tried to convince herself it was nothing, that her mind was just tired. But the sense of being followed grew stronger each day. What Maria didn't know was that her past had already arrived. 3 ghosts of old vows walking under the same desert sky, closing in on the life she had stolen. The evening of Maria's birthday arrived like a scene from a royal fairy tale. The desert air was cool, scented with jasmine and oud. Sheikh Khalid had spared no expense. Crystal chandeliers glowed beneath a vast silk canopy. Gold-rimmed tables surrounded a shimmering pool, and a live orchestra filled the night with soft Arabic music. Guests from across Dubai's high society attended, unaware that the celebration had a hidden purpose. For Khalid, it was not a party. It was a trap carefully disguised as love. Maria looked stunning in a flowing red silk gown, her diamond necklace sparkling under the lights. She moved gracefully among the guests, her laughter light but nervous. The sheikh stayed close to her, calm and unreadable. He had arranged everything meticulously, including a private room within the villa, sealed off from the party. Inside, seated separately and kept unaware of one another, were three men, each waiting for what they had been told was an identity confirmation regarding a missing woman. As the night deepened, Khalid raised a glass to his wife, praising her beauty and strength in front of the crowd. Applause filled the courtyard as Maria blushed, trying to hide the unease crawling beneath her skin. Then Khalid suggested a special surprise, asking the guests to move to the adjoining hall for a brief presentation. Maria followed him, unsure but obedient, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. When the doors opened, she froze. Before her stood three men, faces she had tried to forget, lives she had buried. The air thickened instantly. Her eyes widened, her breath caught, and the sound of distant music faded. The sheikh stepped aside, his expression calm, almost satisfied. The past she had spent years escaping was now standing just a few feet away, and there was no longer anywhere left to run. The silence that followed was unbearable. Maria's hands trembled as her eyes darted from one man to another, each face carrying a memory she had buried long ago. The fisherman from Batangas looked older, his weathered hands clenched into fists. The businessman from Cebu stood stiff, confusion etched across his features. The retired police officer, the last man she had abandoned, stared at her with disbelief that slowly hardened into rage. None of them spoke at first. The truth was too enormous to fit into words. Sheikh Khalid remained still, watching the collision of lives he had orchestrated. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of pain, pride, and vengeance. The room seemed to shrink, the air heavy with betrayal. Maria tried to speak, but her voice broke. The men began shouting, their anger rising like fire. Accusations filled the air: thief, liar, traitor, words sharp enough to cut through the heavy silence of the palace. Security cameras caught every moment as the tension exploded into chaos. One of the men lunged toward her, but Khalid's guards intervened too late. A struggle broke out, fists, shouts, and the sound of breaking glass filled the hall. Someone drew a gun. No one knew who fired first. The blast echoed through the villa, followed by another, and then another. Guests outside screamed as panic spread through the courtyard. Within seconds, the celebration turned into a nightmare. When the noise stopped, two of the men lay motionless on the marble floor. Blood spread across the tiles, glimmering beneath the chandeliers. Maria stood frozen, her gown stained crimson, her eyes wide with shock. The sheikh didn't move. He stood quietly in the corner, staring at the wreckage of the life he had built, the moment his love and vengeance had finally become the same thing. When the police finally arrived at the Alcazar villa, the once bright celebration had turned into a grave scene of horror. The courtyard, still echoing with the fading notes of the orchestra, was now filled with flashing blue lights and panicked whispers. Officers pushed through the crowd of stunned guests as paramedics rushed inside. The grand hall, once glowing with gold and laughter, was smeared with blood. Two men were declared dead at the scene, their bodies covered with white sheets. A third man, bleeding heavily from a shoulder wound, was taken to the hospital under guard. Maria lay near the staircase, unconscious, her red gown darkened by blood. Whether the stains belonged to her or to someone else, no one could tell. Broken glass, overturned chairs, and a toppled champagne tower told the story of sudden chaos. Sheikh Khalid sat silently on a velvet couch, his robes stained with crimson, his face expressionless. He neither cried nor spoke. The police asked questions, but he remained still, answering only when necessary. To them, he looked less like a victim and more like a man who had been waiting for this moment all along. Security footage soon revealed the full sequence: three men entering separately, the confrontation, and the violence that followed. Officers exchanged uneasy glances as they watched the sheik standing calmly in the background throughout it all, never intervening, never reacting. Maria regained consciousness hours later in a hospital bed, her wrists bandaged, her mind shattered by what she had seen. Her first words were of disbelief, her voice barely audible as she asked if the sheik was safe. No one answered her directly. Outside her room, investigators whispered that the fairy tale wedding had ended not in love, but in a massacre that would stain Dubai's reputation for years to come. When the police finally arrived at the Al-Khazar villa, the once bright celebration had turned into a grave scene of horror. The courtyard, still echoing. The investigation into the palace bloodbath began immediately, drawing attention from local authorities and international media alike. Dubai's police worked closely with forensic teams to reconstruct the sequence of events. Every detail mattered: the trajectory of the bullets, the placement of bodies, and the surveillance footage that captured the entire confrontation. What shocked the investigators most was not only the violence, but the cold precision with which it unfolded. Security cameras revealed Sheikh Khalid's calculated orchestration. He had brought Maria's 3 former husbands into the same room, fully aware that the truth would provoke confrontation. He had not fired a single shot, but his role was undeniable. He had engineered a situation that left 2 men dead and 1 severely wounded. His calmness in the midst of chaos made investigators question his motives and mindset. Khalid remained cooperative but silent, offering only factual answers while his eyes betrayed a quiet intensity. Maria, meanwhile, faced legal scrutiny. Charged with bigamy and fraud, her past marriages became central to the case. Each of her former husbands provided statements describing how she had manipulated and deceived them, sometimes for money, sometimes for freedom. The courts considered her history of lies as evidence that she had knowingly endangered lives, though she insisted that she had never imagined the confrontation would turn deadly. The trial gripped the world. Journalists dubbed it the $2 million blood wedding, replaying the footage of the palace massacre for global audiences. Social media exploded with opinions, debates, and outrage. The sheik's role remained controversial, a man whose love had turned into cold strategy, leaving a trail of devastation. As investigators pieced together every fact, one truth became clear. This was not a crime of passion alone, but a carefully orchestrated collision of secrets, lies, and vengeance that had ended in irreversible. The courtroom was packed to capacity, buzzing with journalists, lawyers, and spectators eager to witness the trial that had captivated the world. Maria sat in a black robe, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face pale and tense. Every eye in the room seemed to weigh her guilt and innocence, and the evidence against her was overwhelming. Marriage certificates, photographs, phone records, and witness statements painted a portrait of a woman who had lived multiple lives, deceiving each man she married. Sheikh Khalid attended every session, his presence calm and commanding. He listened without emotion, observing Maria and the proceedings with a detached intensity. The prosecution argued that Maria's deliberate lies and manipulations had directly led to the tragic bloodshed at the palace. They presented security footage and eyewitness accounts, emphasizing how the 3 men had been lured into a confrontation orchestrated by Khalid, but triggered by Maria's past deceptions. Maria's defense claimed she had never intended for anyone to be harmed. She argued that her previous marriages were a survival tactic, a series of decisions made under desperation and fear. She denied any involvement in planning the confrontation, insisting that she had only wanted to live a better life. But the courtroom murmurs told a different story. The public found it hard to sympathize with a woman whose lies had reached such deadly consequences. After weeks of deliberation, the verdict came. Maria was sentenced to 25 years in prison for bigamy, fraud, and endangerment. The surviving husband provided testimony that sealed her fate, describing her manipulations and the lies she had told over the years. Khalid faced heavy fines and public scrutiny, though his personal freedom remained intact. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving behind a silence heavy with the weight of lives shattered, secrets revealed, and justice served in a case that the world would never forget. Months passed, and Dubai's bright lights no longer held the same sparkle for Sheikh Khalid. The once celebrated palace villa, site of his $2 million wedding and the subsequent bloodbath, was abandoned. Gold-plated gates were left to gather dust, and the fountains ran dry, their marble floors cracked and stained as if echoing the tragedy that had unfolded within. Khalid withdrew from public life, selling off most of his properties and retreating to a private desert palace far from the city. The media speculated endlessly, but he rarely spoke, letting the story fade while keeping his silence as a shield. Locals whispered about the villa at night, claiming that faint lights and shadowy figures could be seen moving behind its shuttered windows. Some said they heard faint cries or the sound of footsteps in empty corridors. Stories spread of a place haunted not just by spirits, but by memory, the memory of betrayal, violence, and secrets that could never truly be buried. Khalid rarely left his desert palace, spending hours staring at the horizon where the sun burned crimson against the sand. He avoided gatherings, charity events, and social appearances, leaving the world to wonder whether he was mourning, plotting, or simply surviving. Though Maria remained behind bars, her presence lingered in every corner of Khalid's life. The betrayal he had endured and the orchestrated confrontation he had executed became both a cautionary tale and a personal scar. He had taken vengeance, yet it had cost him peace. Even surrounded by wealth and solitude, Khalid could not escape the shadow of that night, and the abandoned palace stood as a silent monument to love turned deadly, a place where paradise had ended in blood. The story of Maria De Vera and Sheikh Khalid Al Mansoor became one of the most infamous scandals in recent history, a cautionary tale repeated across social media, news outlets, and documentaries. People were fascinated by the extremes of wealth, desire, and deception, how a fairy tale wedding could collapse into a blood-soaked nightmare. Maria's prison sentence served as a stark reminder that lies, no matter how carefully constructed, eventually catch up with those who build their lives on them. The 3 husbands she had abandoned were left to rebuild their shattered lives, carrying scars both physical and emotional. The surviving husband testified in court, sharing how he had been manipulated and abandoned, his story a small piece of the wider tragedy. Khalid, meanwhile, withdrew completely from the public eye, leaving his fortune and properties largely untouched, though the opulent palace where the bloodbath occurred remained abandoned, a silent reminder of the events. Despite the passage of time, whispers continued around Dubai about the abandoned villa, the mysterious lights in the desert, and the shadow of a woman who had fooled a sheikh and nearly destroyed multiple lives. Historians and journalists alike reflected on the case, noting that it was not merely a crime of passion, but a collision of greed, ambition, and secrets too long hidden. The legacy of Maria's lies and the sheikh's calculated vengeance endured as a lesson about trust and deception. What had begun as a glamorous wedding, a symbol of love and wealth, ended in tragedy and horror. It was a story that shocked the world, proving that even in the most dazzling surroundings, human nature, with all its flaws, desires, and betrayals, could turn paradise into a scene of blood, fear, and irreversible consequences.